Thomas, welcome to the Democratizing SEO podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Austine. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Today, we're going to talk about tech giants, knowing users and knowing entities. Now, you work for Enterprise Knowledge. You're a senior consultant at Enterprise Knowledge. What problems do you help clients solve?
Well, the main thing that I do in my role as a senior consultant at Enterprise Knowledge is really help connect individuals at large enterprise organizations to the information that they need to do their job. So when I talk about information, I really mean all of the stuff that they use in their day-to-day lives. This could be data, this could be information, this could be knowledge that particular individuals at the organization have. So as part of my role here, we work on a wide variety of projects. This could range from strategy to implementation to maintenance and everything in between. We work with a large variety of technologies, and we really focus on solving use cases and problems for organizations that come to us and are having trouble connecting their users with the information they need to do their jobs.
How would you define enterprise search?
So enterprise search is really more of a structure of how organizations are able to connect data and information with the knowledge that people have and make it searchable and findable at their organization. Search isn't really so much a technical repository, but it's more so a piece that helps connect different systems together and solve what we like to call the silo problem. So when you think about a silo, it's, someone has information in another department, or maybe there's data that's locked away in an old database that no one knows exists anymore and has problems accessing it. So it's all really about finding content and information that will answer a user's questions. That's really how we think of the problem of enterprise search.
What are some of the frustrations enterprise
Mm.
clients have with their output, their search output?
So I think depending on the way a search system is built, it can find individual things, but it won't necessarily pull in everything, right? For a user that's doing search within an enterprise organization, they need to find things that are actually useful for their job. I think one problem that we see a lot with clients is that everybody wants everything to work like Google, right? And I think that's a good thing and it's a bad thing, right? Like Google is a great product. It's very simple to use. The accuracy is very, very high. And they almost set sort of an impossible bar to meet because they've been doing it for so long and the search system's so refined. We have a very high bar to meet when we're designing for these problems. But Google is also a great benefit to us. It guides our design very well. It guides the actions that we want users to take after they've completed their search. So often for users, search can be an impediment to their job, but we can take design cues and other things from solutions like Google in order to help guide users to the actions that they need to take.
These frustrations, would you say they are ones that all enterprise search systems have? So can you envision Google, for example, having these sort of issues, and Bing and all platforms that have this search functionality, not this a search functionality?
So I think there's kind of two answers to that problem. There's the technical side of things and there's the business side of things, right? And it's really about the way that it's designed. Google was the first really large search engine that was powered by a knowledge graph back in, I think it was 2012. And what that allows them to do is make their search a lot more semantic and deliver very much higher quality results to their end users. And because of that, systems that are technically built on a graph often produce much better search results than search systems that aren't, right? So that's on the technical side of things. On the business side of things, it comes down to how the project is undergone and the use cases are built around search. So, for example, if you're just designing search and you're kind of throwing all your data, throwing all of your information in there, you might not necessarily get the best results to start. But if you can narrow down to a small use case and figure out the exact actions you want a user to take and take that approach, you can get much higher positive feedback from the end users when they're actually using your search system. So if you take, for example, like a normal Google search, when you're looking for a restaurant at the end of the day, you don't want a giant list of 20 to 30 restaurants. You want a map that you can click, right? So it's still search, but it's the way that that information is presented. Google's done a lot of this with knowledge panels and things like that as well. So, you take that that restaurant example and you transition it into more of like an internal enterprise level search. Maybe your users are looking for something like courses for internal learning and things like that. Instead of just presenting them a list of courses, maybe you have a UX component to that as well, where they can register for that course directly on that page, and you can tie in some of the competencies that they may need to achieve with the courses that are going to help them achieve it. So you're tying together two pieces of information.
When I look at big tech firms, all that have a search functionality, I see them having to deal with this issue, appeasing searchers, appeasing users. To satisfy search users, they have to essentially know them, right? And this is one equation. Another equation is to know what they're seeking. Why is a knowledge graph ideal for a big tech firm on the quest to organize the world's information?
So knowledge graph is something that we work with very, very frequently, and it's a technology we advocate very strongly. And the reason that we do that is because it allows you to organize your information in such a way that you have individuals, as an example, as an entity. And anything can really be an entity. It's really about how you're designing that ontology or that data model to power the knowledge graph, right? But because you've organized the different objects that you're searching through, whether it's people, whether it's projects, because you've organized them as separate entities, you can now create relationships about between those entities. So you can capture the aboutness of a search result. So if you're looking for, let's say, example, you type in a search result for eagles. You don't know if you're talking about the band. You don't know if you're talking about the bird. You don't know if you're talking about the golf shot. But what a knowledge graph allows you to do is, if you're expanding that search and you're adding in more contextual information, you can further narrow down what you're looking for based on the relationships that have been established in the graph. On a sort of Google-like implementation, there's been a lot of work to develop a high level of detail and a high level of metadata capture on each of those entities. When we think about taking that solution and applying it in an enterprise setting, it's making sure that we've resourced all of that data and information to build out that same level of detail on the relationships and the entities within a specific organization.
You mentioned you defined entities there. Is it simply a name, place, or a thing?
Definitely not. An entity could really be anything. It's, again, about how you design that ontology and you design the data model that's really powering the graph. So if you think about it from an enterprise perspective, if you're looking for information about a project that you're working on, right, not all of that information is necessarily going to be in one place. You may have financial information. You may have contractor information. You may have information about the people working on the project, about the deliverables of that project. All of those separate entities, whether it's a financial institution, whether it's a specific instance of a contractor, those can all be individual entities. And then how you relate them are the relationships between those entities. So often when we're doing kind of coaching sessions on these things, we start with a very simple concept. So maybe book or author, right? Those could be sets of objects, sets of people, and we use those to tie together those specific instances of entities within a version of a knowledge graph.
Is there a priority order out of entities and the relationship? Is there a case of entities is more important, or is it the opposite? Relationships are more important?
So I think from an implementation perspective, when we're actually working with our clients to help develop knowledge graph, it's often easier to help them conceptualize things with an entity first approach. So we start to think about, okay, what data sources are really critical to your day-to-day business, and then what objects within those data sources or those content pieces are specifically important. That helps us start to identify, okay, these are the entities that we're starting with. From there, we can start to build out, okay, what are the relationships between those different entities? So how is a person and a project, how are they related together? A person, a competency, and a course, how do those things connect and transition to one another? So from an implementation perspective, entities are usually the easier approach for when we're working with clients. When we think about it from the actual search implementation and how is the search system going to work, the relationships are really the key piece. If you can capture those relationships accurately and you can have a high level of metadata and detail on those relationships, that's what's going to power that aboutness. That's what's going to power the relevancy, so that you're getting contextual meaning to your search results and you're not just doing something like matching on individual keywords for a search result.
The old ways.
Yeah, exactly. That's really the difference between, a Google-like search and a very basic enterprise search. Is instead of doing kind of keyword matching on search, you're adding a lot of contextual meaning, whether it's the documents that are relevant, whether it's the data that's relevant. You're combining all of that information to make sure the user's actually getting what they're looking for, as opposed to just a list of keyword matches.
The way Google knows about their users is quite apparent, right? If you have an Android, Google knows about you. If you have a Gmail, Google knows about you. If you have any one of their many products and all services, they know about you. How do they go about knowing about entities?
So what I would say Google does very, very well is they have a very well structured ontology, and they have a very, very well structured data model that is powering their graph engine. So if I were to kind of take what Google's done and trying to translate that into kind of how an enterprise approaches that, it really starts with how their content is modeled in order to build that ontology, right? So if you think about it from a business perspective, they're really good at identifying, or Google is really good at identifying what entities are relevant to the search query that you've submitted. And they're really good at adding specific meaning to what those relevant items are. So if you look at an ontology as an example, which again is really just the underlying data model and structure for a knowledge graph, when you think about that from an enterprise perspective, it's almost very similar to the way that you would traditionally think about content type for documents, right? So content types are normally tied to a system. An ontology is almost a canonical version of that. It's something we advocate for because it's system agnostic. It can really be applied in many different settings. But when you're thinking about entities from your enterprise perspective, you're really starting to drill down and drive into, what objects and fields do you have that represent the entities that you're trying to return to the end user. So making sure you have all of the core key items for your business, making sure that you focus down and you're really focused on a small model initially to really ensure that you're driving to relevancy from the start, and looking at some of your traditional data sources to identify what objects and fields make up the information that you're trying to return. So when you think about it from a Google perspective, they've had 20 plus years to iteratively refine that model over time and capture that level of detail on their entities and on their relationships. When you think about it from an enterprise perspective, and you're just starting out on an enterprise search project, or maybe you want to add in graph to your existing search product, you're not going to be able to get to the level of performance of Google right away. But if you take kind of that smaller MVP approach and you embed graph into your search solutions on a small level and really go into detail on modeling your entities and modeling your relationships, that's how you can get that Google level quality on a smaller scale and really know about your entities on a smaller scale.
How can organizations include specific information and data to customize their entities for their end users?
Yeah, so that's probably the question we get asked the most as consultants in this space. So if we look at a large organization today, they have tons and tons of data. I've worked with a lot of clients who are really they're in the process of inventorying their data. They have petabytes and petabytes of data, and a lot of it's kind of lost its purpose along the way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's taking the time to identify, okay, what are the priority resources, either from stories or internal, office talk that you've heard that these data sets are very, very important. Using that information and cataloging things like logical models and data dictionaries to get a metadata inventory for priority assets or priority documents that you have, that often has a lot of technical information already captured in your source systems, and you could use that and leverage that to power your search systems. Also, traditionally, things like master data management systems have been used to store a lot of this information. Things like data dictionaries, a lot of that holds the technical information for data sources that could be returned as a result of search. I think our challenge is a lot stronger on the cultural and the business side, because from the data perspective, maybe all of this information is captured, maybe it's legacy systems, but on the cultural and the business side, there are often individuals in organizations that have knowledge about these data sources, about how the data sources are used, about why they're structured the way they are, about how they need to be transformed to be used for a particular use case if you're doing statistical analysis on them. So for us, the challenge is really, how do we talk to those users and make sure we're capturing their knowledge and embedding their knowledge into the graph? So it's not just about the data, it's not just about the content and what you have stored technically, it's about interviewing your users and talking to your users to capture that knowledge and information in the graph as well. So that when we go back to, okay, a user's gotten their search result, what action do they want to take? Are they looking for data because they want to conduct the analysis? They don't just need the data returned. They need to know how to use the data. In what cases can I use the data? Are there any privacy and security requirements around me using that data? So it's talking to many different teams in the organization to capture specific domain knowledge about the data and about the content that they're presenting to users in their search results.
Once an organization has tailored the search for their users, their end users, how can they then ensure that their users are getting the information that they need?
Yeah, so this is actually, I think, very, very undervalued in some of the work that we do. To a degree, there's an element of what we call like a squeaky wheel, right? So if you have a search product at your organization and it's not working, your users will definitely let you know, right? And they'll let you know why they're experiencing their frustrations. When you hear that issue, there's really two ways that you can go about fixing that problem. There's things from the technical perspective. So if you do have graph powering your search, you can adjust the graph. You can change some of the weightings that you have set up against your source data repositories, your source content repositories, and you can adjust how the graph is technically integrated based on the complaints that you're getting. But the other way that you can do it is by advocating to get feedback from your users, to reach out to those users directly. One way that we start to do that as we're rolling out enterprise search solutions is to give search results to a user and actually have them rank the results. Similar to how you would kind of rate a product on Amazon, you should be able to rank not only the result, but the metadata that's associated with that result to basically give an answer of, does this result have all of the information that I need in order to do my job? You want to be able to baseline those results, make changes to your system, and then baseline it again. So as you're rolling out enterprise search, whether it's with graph or without graph, you want to make sure that you're taking consistent metrics and interacting with your users and collecting that user feedback to really understand, are the results you're giving them solving their problems at the end of the day? And even before all of this, when you're first starting to kind of roll out this project, you want to make sure you've clearly identified what problems they're facing. Is the problem that they're getting zero results, right? Like, do you need to update your metadata? Do you need to update your taxonomy? Is there a particular acronym that someone in your organization is using that you haven't captured? What do you really need to update, either in the graph or in the search index or any of those, to solve some of the problems the end user is facing?
You mentioned ranking there, and it just got me thinking. And I'm interested to hear your personal experience in this. As a knowledge expert, when you use something like Google search, are you expecting them to provide you with a list of ranked sites? Or, bearing in mind we're in the age of AI, do you prefer them to carry out the research for you and present you with the best information rather than ranking the information?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I really like about Google, more so than a lot of the other kind of search products that are out there today, is that it's not necessarily about the rankings. It's about the fact that all of the information that you could need, depending on what direction you want to take your search, is often just provided to you in a nice little knowledge panel, or is right there for you kind of above the fold on your screen. So Google knows enough about your search so that it can contextualize how it presents the results to you, so that if you want to take your search in a different direction, it's right there for you, right? So it's not only is it not giving you ranked results or kind of carrying out that search for you, what it's doing is it's giving you multiple different ways for you to kind of navigate around and take your search in a different direction, right? Again, I brought this up before with the restaurants example, right? If I type restaurants in my area, right, I'll get the ability to click on a map and move around and search in different geographical locations, right? The ability to transfer from a standard kind of ranked list to that map view, or maybe to reviews of restaurants in a particular area, is very, very useful, right? So for us, kind of in the enterprise environment, it's a very similar case, right? Like we're working with a lot of internally facing data, right? And for us, it's not necessarily important, right? Again, it's about helping users do their job at the end of the day. But if we're giving something as the second document that's relevant to your search, or the first document for your search, it's not really affecting the way somebody does their job at the end of the day, right? So it's not weighted as strictly as something like an e-commerce search, for example. So what's really important, if you're not kind of going to be following that ranked structure, is that you have metrics about how your user is actually accessing that content. What search terms are they using, and are they getting to the end result that they need? Not necessarily as heavily weighted on the ranking.
It's amazing. One doesn't realize how good Google is until one tries a search on the website and see that the results are completely irrelevant.
Yep.
And I tried this not so long ago, and I was amazed of how poor it was. And it just goes to show, well, Google, of course, they have 20 plus years in the game. But I think a lot of enterprise clients really need to step up their internal search system. And knowledge panels on Google is just so helpful for me as a, even as an SEO, but also as a user of search. It just makes things so, it's pleasant.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think UX is really, really undervalued as part of
Yep.
the search experience. But I've talked to dozens of clients where we've gone in to do a search implementation. We take a baseline of both from a technical perspective, and sort of the content repositories, the data repositories we're working with, how things are being accessed, but also just their end user experience of their internal search products, whether it's through SharePoint repositories or through data catalogs and things like that. And are they getting the results they need? After we've tied a knowledge graph in, which is really the technical underpinnings of a Google like search experience, the relevancy scores and the user feedback that we get on a lot of those search results are much, much, much higher. So a lot of the executives and a lot of the clients that we're working with are really pleased to see kind of the results that can benefit from, including that semantic meaning, the contextual meaning, and adding in those relevant topics into search results.
Hmm. Once organizations have developed a knowledge graph, what type of information and data products can they provide to their clients?
Yeah, so Knowledge Graph powers a lot of different solutions. So, I think we've mentioned it a couple times on this call already, but knowledge panels are a very, very big one, right? So, being able to kind of tie together location data, people data, product data, and tie that all together in one spot. But there's a lot of other benefits to Graph as well. Recommendation engines, right? So, if you've captured enough information about your entities and about your relationships, you can start to proactively recommend things to users. So I've talked about courses previously. So if you're taking information, enough about an individual, enough about the courses, know enough about the core competencies that a user needs to achieve, you can start to proactively recommend courses and educational courses to them in order to upskill them. There's things like chatbots, LLMs, specific data products. Often we see our customers are starting to move a lot more to the cloud. So they're either moving to a data lake, a data warehouse, a lake house. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to create data products out of those cloud-based data storage systems. So what Knowledge Graph allows you to do is really tie together all of the metadata around some of those data products so that what additional data products you can spin off for specific user groups. So again, enough about the data, enough about the people that are consuming them, and you can actually say, pull 3 columns from this table, pull 3 columns from this table, tie them together, and you've created an entirely new offering for your users to use based on Graph. Graph is really allowing you to tie in that contextual information and even provide additional recommendations for things that you can create in the future, whether it's recommendation engines, whether it's chatbots, whether it's data products. You're able to create a wide variety of solutions for your end users.
If you were a solutions provider and have provided this knowledge graph solution to tech firms that have a search product, how would you pitch this solution?
So I would say that, from the clients that we've worked with and the clients and kind of the demands that we've heard from them, one of the main things that they're looking for is they really want to see the benefit of Graph and they want to see improved search quickly, but they're often very unfamiliar with how intuitive it is to use. So I think this is somewhere where we advocate very strongly and where we've seen a lot of benefit is how we take sort of an MVP approach to search and knowledge and embedding knowledge graph into search and really making sure that we start first with individual use cases. One of the key benefits of graph is that you can start really, really small. And then from there, not only are you only focused on a specific area of data or content, but as you're implementing it on that small scale, you're creating a repeatable and implementable process with those use cases that you can then take further into your organization. So what we recommend as we're sort of pitching and advocating for including Graph as part of search solutions is that there's a real opportunity to create a really direct, focused initiative around this and create an accelerator in your organization where you can actually start to see real benefits with Graph and embedding it into your search and into that experience really within 3 to 4 months. Right. So Graph, I think people look at and sometimes can seem a little as a technology that's a little bit off in the distance. But once you've kind of familiarized yourself, you've kind of taken maybe a couple courses online, you've read a couple articles on it, you start to understand that it really is an intuitive tool to use because conceptually, you're just thinking about it as different objects and how they're related to each other. And as you start to kind of build confidence in that, you can really start to see real benefits, including that in your approach, really in 3 to 4 months.
Are there any other benefits in including a knowledge graph in one's organization?
Yeah, so I think, I've mentioned a couple of those previously, kind of with the knowledge panels, the recommendation engines, the data products. We're seeing a lot of research now coming in regarding large language models and how including knowledge graph as part of some of those LLMs can add a lot of contextual meaning as well. So we see a lot of kind of leading organizations that are kind of on the forefront of AI starting to look at knowledge graph as an addition to AI solutions as well. And then from there, it really depends on your industry and the kind of the use cases that you're trying to tackle as a business. So we've seen people on the financial side really look at knowledge graph as a solution for fraud detection. Again, because we're really just relating concepts. We're adding weightings to relationships between those concepts, using that knowledge graph as a network to identify if a particular transaction is considered fraud or not. We also see a lot on sort of the marketing side in terms of entity resolution, right? So because we're tying all of these different entities together, often a lot of individuals or a lot of organizations on the marketing side will acquire a lot of data from a lot of different sources in order to power their graphs, in order to power their marketing engines. Often there'll be discrepancies between how that data is collected and how it's tied together. And what that knowledge graph really allows you to do is tie together entities that would seem completely disparate, but they have enough matching criteria and there's enough granularity on those weightings to say, maybe these two records of an individual person are actually the same person. So we've gone through instances where we've taken billions and billions of records and we've narrowed it down to the tens and hundreds of millions, right? So we're talking about large scale entity resolution happening very quickly and happening at a much lower cost because we have all of that contextual information that we've captured.
Once all of this data is utilized and the knowledge graph is essentially built or created, who then maintains the knowledge graph?
So that's kind of a wide question, right? So there's multiple different types of graph, right? So one of the things that we see knowledge graphs kind of fitting in, or where we see knowledge graphs usually fitting in, are really in kind of the information architecture space or the data architecture space. That's really who we see taking ownership of these types of systems. Usually it typically falls into kind of the more technical section, right? And with the adoption of graph, and one thing that we advocate as we're implementing graph is to be able to train those technical users on the skills they need, not just to maintain search, but to maintain graph as well. How do you keep that information of the highest quality? So that's on the technical side. On the business side, that is an entirely different effort to make sure that the information is kept up to date and that metadata is kept up to date for everything that you're bringing into the search engine. So usually there is a stewardship and a governance process that is built out around the information, around the data, around the content that's brought into the graph. So usually you have named stewards that are responsible for maintaining completeness of metadata around those separate assets, and you have end users. So often we see organizations, as they start to roll out graph and embed it into their search, they're making cultural changes as well. They want to make sure that individuals at their organization are taking ownership and responsibility for the data that they use. So if they see a problem with it, they should be able to report that. So as we're implementing graph, we're also implementing other solutions like data catalogs so that users have an avenue. If they're seeing problems with this information, they can mark it down. Maybe that sends out a notification or a workflow to a data steward to say, okay, this problem actually needs to be resolved. We're seeing a lot of vendors in the space do reporting and embedded reporting on health of data sets as part of their search results. So not only are you getting a search result for a data source, you're getting a search result, but when was the last time that pipeline was run? Were there any health issues with that pipeline the last time it was run? Has anyone reported any issues with any of the business applicability for this particular data set? We're seeing a lot more of that contextual information that's brought in. That's really run by traditional teams that would either manage engineering pipelines or end users that are just viewing that information and want to be heard and want to provide their feedback.
Is there a way of having a system that's self-governance system? An example will be on social media. I'm on TikTok quite often, and what I notice on TikTok and all social platforms is they have a system, an inbuilt system where it's updated. Their knowledge graph is, or should I say, the data point for their knowledge graphs is inputted by the users. And in that sense, it's sort of updated by its users. Is there a sort of system where either big tech, social or search can have this in place for knowledge graphs and also knowledge panels in the case of search?
Yeah, I would say, obviously things like TikTok, obviously things like Google, they're already starting to move in that direction. I would say where we are in the enterprise space is we're moving in that direction, but we're not necessarily quite there yet, right? There is an opportunity for that. We're seeing that with a lot of the knowledge graph products and a lot of the data catalog products that are in the space where they're actually using AI to identify what is the metadata about a particular source. So it could look at things like table names and column names and say, this table is actually about this, and loop that information in. From an end user perspective, there's definitely a way, and we've started to kind of build some of this out already, but to capture what are users actually clicking on, right? So if you have people, you have your person entity, right? And people in a particular role tend to click on this data set when they do that search. That's going to boost that search up so that as other users are doing search for that same type of data, they're getting the items that are most relevant to them. I think when it comes to adding that metadata and adding that contextual information, those are the problems that organizations are looking to build out and automate. I don't think we're at the point of kind of self-populating yet, but we are at the point of trying to automate the ingestion and update of those pipelines very, very frequently. So if you are pulling in technical sources, maybe you have a data dictionary. The next time that data dictionary gets updated, that should automatically update the graph, and that graph should automatically update the search indices, right? So from there, we're seeing more of that type of implementation, but I would expect within the next 3 to 5 years, a lot of that gets built out with AI as well.
All of these big tech firms, right? They are our upline as businesses. We're all reliant on them for organic traffic. And the way they use knowledge graph technology is fascinating. Do you envision a use case for not having a knowledge graph?
So I wouldn't say not necessarily having a knowledge graph. I see a lot of benefits in including graph. One of the things that I would say, though, is for the content that's included in the knowledge graph, we're seeing a lot of organizations be very, very careful about the entities they're creating and what information that they're collecting as part of those entities. So for a lot of the clients that I work with, a lot of larger financial institutions and a lot of federal agencies are putting a lot of investment in maintaining people's privacy. Privacy is a very, very
Yeah.
large concern, and I know I talked to, about it before with sort of that marketing use case, but um, people are very, very concerned about, do they want to be included in some of these graphs, some of these technologies? Do they want personally identifiable information captured about those in those graphs? And if users at a business are searching for that information, how can they see that information? Is it obfuscated? Has there been some noise injected into it? And it's funny because one of the easiest ways to solve this problem is actually with graph. It's entity resolution in a graph, right? But all of this information or all of this investment is really, really important because it's going into how to protect individuals and how to protect information. So specifically, having indicators and metadata in there that identify when to get rid of information in the graph is absolutely key for organizations that are prioritizing privacy, right? So it's not necessarily about not including graph. It's about knowing when and where to capture particular information in the graph. That I think is the key.
Have you come across an organization that have included a knowledge graph within their business and regressed on that idea and say, actually, let's go back to the old ways?
Not yet, fortunately. I haven't seen anyone, fortunately, that's kind of thrown out graph. We have had some clients kind of come to us kind of in the middle of adopting graph, right? They've started, but maybe the project isn't going so well, and they're kind of using us as a way to kind of refresh their implementation, right? And again, I've talked about a lot of this before. Some of this is on the implementation side. We want to make sure that it's a very focused approach, that it stays kind of at that MVP and detailed use case level, and that you're starting with a core group of users so you can maintain relevancy and you make sure you're capturing all of that metadata. But a lot of this is a training and a lot of it is a cultural thing, right? It's making sure that we're changing the culture so that users know that they're responsible for some of the results that they're getting, right? If they're not updating that metadata information, if they're not updating kind of any of that contextual information, or they're not proactively providing it to the people that are implementing the knowledge graph, then that's going to directly affect their search results. So they need to know that some of the problems that they're facing, they can solve on their own. They just have to make sure that the knowledge that they have is captured within the source system so that it can power the graph. Those are the things that we advocate for. Some of that, again, is a training basis. So it's a familiarity with the tool. It's a familiarity with some of the newer technologies that are coming out to understand how to do it. And some of it is just making the problem known to the organization.
Is it easier to m- include a knowledge graph within a business that already has tons of data points, or to start from scratch with a knowledge graph, start collecting data from scratch with a knowledge graph?
Yeah, so I've actually worked kind of with both cases, and I wouldn't necessarily say one's easier than the other. They just kind of have their own unique challenges, right? I think I'm kind of going to assume that if you're starting from scratch, you're more of a smaller organization.
Hmm.
It's making sure that you actually have the resources available to maintain the graph over a long term as you're scaling up your main business lines, right? And making sure that you have people on staff to do that. I think it's it's good that you're kind of taking the what we call the the better approach from the start, right? And you're starting with the graph, but you want to make sure that you actually it fits your business needs, and that you're tackling it from the start with the right people, the right effort, the right level of commitment. On the other hand, you have large organizations with tons and tons and tons of data. Often what we see with those clients is they want to be able to scale that solution very, very quickly, and they want to be able to ingest all of their data very, very quickly. That's possible, but you have to make sure that the rest of your organization is ready to catch up with that, right? So the data isn't usually the showstopper. It's either the contextual information. You have a lot of data, but no one knows anything about it, or even if it's even useful to the organization, or you don't necessarily have the culture or the people within your organization that can advocate and own the maintenance of a lot of the metadata of that information. So as we start to think about, okay, we've started with this MVP approach, we've started with this core group of users, how are we going to scale that out very, very quickly within a 1 to 2 year time frame? So I talked before about the MVP. Usually that's about 3 to 4 months. We try to scale things out over a year or two because we are ingesting more data. That means more subject matter experts that we need to train and upskill in order to add in that contextual information. And it also means making sure that the solution is trained on all of that additional information that's brought into the system. So once you have those two things and you iterate through that over the year or two process, that's where you really see the full scale adoption, right? So all throughout that process, you're onboarding new users onto that search process, and like I talked before, you're collecting metrics all along the way to make sure as you're adding new sources, as you're changing and update that graph to capture new relationships and new entities, those search results that you're getting are still relevant to what your end users and the actions that they're trying to take are.
What do you consider to be a semantic layer, and how do search and knowledge graphs fit into this?
Yeah, so semantic layer is very, very connected to search and very connected to knowledge graphs. The kind of simple way that we like to explain a semantic layer is the thing that's really going to solve the silo problem and is going to connect all of an organization's stuff. And I mentioned this at the beginning of the call as well, right? Stuff is not just data, it's not just search results, it's content, it's information, it's contextual knowledge that individuals have. So what we've seen is within the past year or so is that there's been sort of a shift in business focus where over the past couple of years, things have been kind of batted around. You've heard the term data fabric. You've heard the term data mesh to kind of as the approaches to solve a lot of these problems. But I think what organizations are finally realizing is it's not just about having all the data in one place like you would with a data warehouse or a data lake, but it's really about having an understanding of the meaning of the data and the context that the organization provides to that data and how all of those things are related. That's really kind of the core principle of a semantic layer. So it's a little bit larger than a data fabric, and data fabric tends to be more centered around structured data. A semantic layer connects all of the knowledge assets within an organization, whether it's content, films, videos, any type of media, and all of the unstructured documents, as well as all of that contextual metadata and knowledge into a solution and multiple different technologies in order to present via search the correct results and the correct information to end users.
Thomas, every business should know this about knowledge graphs. What would this be?
Yeah, so I would say that if I had to distill it down into one thing, knowledge graphs are really the key to powering semantic search in the enterprise. Like above all, knowledge graph is really what you need for semantic search in the enterprise. And again, I can't say this enough. It's not just about the things that the typical resources that you can search for. It's about capturing knowledge, right? That's why it's a knowledge graph, because it's not just about the technical resources. It's about the information and context that your users and your organization can provide. That's what's really going to take your search from what we were talking about earlier with just matching keywords to that next level of actions that a user can take after they've gotten the results that they want.
Well said, Thomas. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, so we're in a couple different places. You can find us on enterpriseknowledge.com. We have a very, very large knowledge base. So if you're a nerd like me and you love reading about this sort of stuff, we have articles across a wide variety of spectrums, whether it's taxonomy and ontology design, whether it's knowledge graph implementations, data catalogs, content structure. We have a large amount of content. So, it's all free and it's open to everybody. So you're welcome to kind of visit the site and read more about that. We have a couple different people in our organization presenting on very similar subjects at a couple different conferences. Our CEO, Zach Wall, will be at the Knowledge Summit in Dublin. And my personal mentor, Lulit Tesfaye, will be the keynote speaker at Henry Stewart, talking about a lot of the similar things that we've talked about today. Also, if you're, again, very, very into this subject, there's a book that we've provided on it. It's called Making Knowledge Management Clickable. It's about 300 pages, and it goes into a lot of the technical and business detail of how to actually implement some of these solutions.
Is that on Amazon?
I believe so, yes.
I am getting into knowledge graph, so I'm trying to absorb as much as I can. So I'll be checking that one out. Thomas, thank you so much for your time today. Have a brilliant day, and it's been a pleasure speaking with you and hearing your fascinating insights on this topic.
Awesome. It was great to talk to you as well, Austine. Thank you.
Awesome. Cheers.